In Washington now is Nile Gardiner, director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. Mr. Gardiner, pleasure to have you here on BBC World News. After another long week in British politics, what's your take from the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I have to say that things do not look particularly good for Theresa May at this time. And also she's put forward a Brexit deal which seems to be really disastrous in many respects, that does not command the support of many in her own party. I think there's a lot of concern here in Washington with regard to the May Brexit proposal, what it means for the United States, especially for a US-UK free trade deal. After all, if Britain is tied indefinitely to the EU customs union, Britain will not be able to negotiate its own free trade agreements with countries across the world, including with the United States. So that's a real issue of concern here. And certainly I think President Trump has been very critical in recent months over Theresa May's handling of the Brexit negotiations. He's not weighed in, I think, on this latest May proposal. But I have to say here in Washington, the optics, certainly from London, do not look good at this time. And Theresa May appears to have negotiated an agreement with the EU, which gives an extraordinary degree of control to the European Union at the expense of Great Britain, America's closest friend and ally, and that's not a good thing.
I can understand how a trade deal is, of course, a long-term objective, but can you see how she has more pressing concerns, and that is getting the EU to sign up to something that is viable?
Well, I don't think that it's a good strategy to make concession after concession after concession to the European Union. Theresa May has to honour, I think, the will of the British people. 17.4 million people voted for Brexit. And it's very clear, I think, the British people want Great Britain to be out of the customs union and the single market. Being part of the customs union means that Britain is shackled to the EU. It has to accept a lot of EU regulation, EU tariff barriers as well, for example. Britain is not able to compete effectively on the world stage. And I think anything here that undermines Britain's long-term sovereignty and its ability to shape its own future on the world stage, anything that undermines that, I think, is a real threat to British interests. And I think it's also something that will undermine the US-UK special relationship as well. It's in America's national interest to have a Great Britain on the world stage that is a sovereign, independent nation that can work closely with the United States. And a US-UK free trade deal is a big part of that big picture. And if you're part of the EU customs union, you cannot negotiate your own free trade agreements. You are shackled to the European Union. You do not have your own sovereignty and self-determination. And that, I think, is a huge problem with the May proposal.